Alright YouTube, so we are back with some FF7 Remake content. We actually got like a huge info dump today, sort of. We have this like interview with a bunch of the people working on Final Fantasy VII Remake. We have a new like key art for Barrett and Marlene. It's kind of a remake of the, actually it is a remake of the booklet art, if you guys remember that from Final Fantasy VII. And then we also have the revelation of a returning summon. And actually I almost forgot, we also have what almost looks like a different version of the Aerith key art. And I'll get into that as we go through the video. So first up, let's look at that Barrett/Marlene key art. They dropped a tweet earlier that says, "Here's another one of our remade pieces of artwork from the original Final Fantasy VII to celebrate the upcoming release of FF7R. Barrett holds his adopted daughter Marlene on his shoulder as they watch flowers blooming in an old church." Really quickly, I'm kind of confused why they wouldn't just call it the Sector 5 church, since that's what it is. It's not just some random obscure church with flowers growing in it. It's the church where Cloud meets Aerith. So obviously this looks completely badass, so an updated version of one of the most memorable images from Final Fantasy VII, the booklet at least, because I remember looking at that booklet so many times as a kid. So this image of Barrett holding Marlene on his shoulder just burned into my memories, and it's so awesome to see just like a really high quality version of that now. This is also interesting because a couple months back when we got the updated Cloud key art, I'd posed the question of whether or not we'd see other characters' key arts updated, and this is the first step towards that. And as I mentioned near the beginning, it does seem like we have an updated version of Aerith's key art, and it actually comes from the website, the Square Enix website that has the interview with all the people that are working on the game. I honestly just grabbed this image from that website because it looked cool, I thought it was badass, and I wanted to talk about it anyways. But then it kind of clicked when I was looking through the character key arts to get the images for Barrett and all that stuff in the segment before this, and then it clicked looking at it that this is actually the exact same image minus the airship. So as you can see, these images are pretty much the same, minus the airship. You have Aerith standing on some sort of concrete platform. You have like green open fields in front of her as far as the eye can see. You have her left arm kind of bent upwards, right arm extended, and her ponytail blown in the wind to the right. I've never really known where this picture's supposed to take place, possibly Junon, since that's where we first get the airship, which would mean that the other image, the updated version of this, would be our first look within the remake outside the walls of Midgar. And even if this isn't supposed to be Junon, it's so clearly outside of Midgar. When it comes to this article over here on Square Enix's website, it's quite lengthy, so obviously not everything that's here is something that we have to actually talk about or read, but there are a few little snippets I want to look at, mainly Tetsuya Nomura's like whole segment. It's pretty interesting. So first up, I want to look at the Nomura segment. It starts with, "I started up the Final Fantasy VII Remake project around the time of compilation of Final Fantasy VII. We'd gone through Advent Children, Before Crisis, Crisis Core, and Dirge of Cerberus, and I was playing this by myself for about a year as the 5th and final entry in the compilation." The compilation of Final Fantasy VII was announced and started in 2003, but ended with Crisis Core, which came out in 2007. That was the last thing that was added to this. The latest release technically would have been 2009 with the Advent Children like Complete Edition. For me, this is some pretty big information. This is something I've never heard before. Nomura has been conceptualizing the remake as far back as like a decade ago, like 07 to 09, pretty much sometime after Crisis Core came out. But also that it was supposed to be a part of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII and be the 5th and final entry. For me, that's incredibly interesting. Since that initial plan and my first ideas, other projects took shape and I became very busy as they moved forward, but I never stopped thinking about 7. As such, I feel like I'm looking forward to the release as much as anyone, as I've been carrying around these ideas for a long time. Opportunities for discussing our true intentions are few, but with regard to the size of the game that many are asking about, there's no reason at all to worry. Even in this Midgar portion alone, the density and volume are so great that I had to give directions to lighten them. So what he's saying there is that even though this first entry for Final Fantasy VII Remake is Midgar only, it has so much density and volume to it that he actually had to give people directions around Midgar. That actually has me excited, like beyond excited. This is something I've been saying for a long time. That's what I wanted. I wanted a game Midgar only, but like expand the absolute hell out of Midgar. People would see a lot of people talk about like, how can the game be Midgar only? Blah, blah, blah. There's so much of this Midgar that we've never actually seen, and also the original game PS1 didn't even give you an idea, a realistic idea of how big the city would actually be. With regard to new characters, of whom I said during past interviews that there would be none, though they aren't main characters, their numbers ended up growing considerably in the process of creating a rich depiction of Midgar. When you think of Midgar's final boss, you probably think of the motor, but in this game, new bosses will appear and add to the excitement of the story even more. We've already begun working on the next one as well, but I'm confident that playing through this title will expand your expectations just like the world that extends beyond Midgar. Until next time. So us getting new bosses in Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't really news because we all pretty much assumed and knew that that would happen, but what I did find interesting is that he talks about how if you picture or think of the final boss of the Midgar segment, you picture Motorball, which he calls Motor, which might be the new name, but then he goes on to say how there's new bosses in the game, so it makes me think that he's kind of confirming for us that Motorball is no longer the final boss when it comes to the Midgar segment. A lot of people have discussed Rufus Shinra being the final boss of the first Final Fantasy VII Remake game, and I think it makes a lot of sense. He should be a more prominent character when it comes to the remake because he takes over Shinra after President Shinra gets killed by Sephiroth, so he should be and feel like a more important character. And we already get a fight with him at the end of the Midgar segment anyway, or at least near the end of it, so maybe they just remix it and put him at the very end somehow, somewhere maybe on the highway or something. And that's just assuming that the game actually ends on that highway again, because it could be something entirely different. This next part comes from the segment with Katsushika Nojima, who is the scenario and story writer, and it says, "It was an exciting task to introduce a new current of wind to Final Fantasy VII, but at the same time, there was some fear. The original game used cartoon-like stylized art, and the story was completed by players using their imagination to supplement portions that couldn't be depicted as a result. Even if they were seeing the same scene, the information they took away from it and how they interpreted it differed depending on the viewer. Perhaps it's what might be considered a narrative form of storytelling nowadays. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, there will be much less room for player imagination. This fact will probably change the feel of the story considerably. People who know the original might not know quite how to take it. Such is the fear that I have, but I also have conviction. It should be possible to feel a much deeper connection to Cloud as you join alongside him. It would be amazing if you could feel that fiery flame together with him." I wanted to read that part because it actually makes a lot of sense. With the original game, there wasn't voice acting, obviously. It was a 1997 PlayStation 1 game, right? You had to read every piece of dialogue yourself, whether out loud or in your head, so you bond with the story more, you kind of get more into it. With modern games, there's voice acting. The lines are said to you, you don't have to read anything. I think there's something that's kind of comparable, but not exactly, with the Fallout series, something that relates to the channel. You have the Fallout 3 New Vegas, where your character never talked, you only chose options from a dialogue menu. And then you had Fallout 4, where they actually gave you a voice protagonist. A lot of people didn't like it. Your character never talked before, and it was such a different thing, you didn't feel the weight of the story as much. I think it'll be perfectly fine, but it is a possibility that the people who played the original game might not like the story as much this time around because it's being told to you as opposed to you reading it and interpreting the story for yourself. The next little segment comes from Motomu Toriyama, who's the scenario designer and co-director of the game, and I wanted to read it over because he's the guy who worked on the original game on Sector 7 Slums and Wall Market, which you guys know I love me some Wall Market. We took care to remake not only the main characters, but also characters like Johnny and the Shinra middle manager who were created back then. Please keep your eye out to see how they make their new appearances. Additionally, when remaking the Honeybee Inn at the Wall Market, we revived it as a pantheon of entertainment, which couldn't be realized back then. Here, the scene that many of you have been eager to see, where Cloud disguises himself, please enjoy. So we actually get quite a bit of information from that paragraph, a lot of it regarding the Wall Market segment, but the fact that the game itself is going to expand on these smaller characters that were just kind of whatever in the original game, like Johnny and Shinra Middle Manager. He doesn't even get his own name, it's just Shinra Middle Manager. They're actually going to expand on these smaller characters, which I think is awesome. For a minor character, we actually see Johnny quite a bit throughout the game. He's in the Sector 7 slums. We later see him on the train. Past that, we run into him at the front of the Honeybee Inn in Wall Market. And then even past that, later on in the game, we come across him at Costa del Sol. Johnny is also a part of On the Way to a Smile episode Denzel, so he's somewhat prominent for such a minor character, but it's nice to know that they're going to expand on all the characters within FF7, it seems like. And for me, I believe that's everything I want to talk about regarding the article over on Square Enix's website. Again, it's pretty lengthy. We didn't want to read it all. There's like 10 or more different people that they're talking to and interviewing, so it's a long read. So if you want to check it out, of course, it'll be linked in the description below. And last up for this video is the returning summon. And the returning summon is Chocomog, or Chocobo and Moogle as they call it now, which is pretty cool. I mean, this is the first summon you ever get in Final Fantasy VII, so I kind of assumed that it was going to be in the game, just didn't know if it's going to be in the first one or the next one. With some of the images they tweeted out, we see him using an attack that somewhat resembles his attack from the original game with all the stars floating around. But we also get this image that I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. We see multiple Chocobos. We see the one Chocomog right there in the middle, but all the other ones are just Chocobos with no Moogles on their back. I don't know if he's splitting apart, summoning more Chocobo, calling more Chocobo. I don't know exactly. This could be like his somewhat limit break, so much like Ifrit's Hellfire or whatever. Either way, it's badass, and it's nice to know that Chocomog is returning. And that initially was going to be the end of the video, but as I've been recording and making this video throughout the day, they've actually put out some key art for both Reno and Rude, which is kind of cool. It's our first key art for these characters. Not our first time seeing them, but still the first time getting some key art. And that'll pretty much wrap up the video, my dudes. And this is what I talk about when I say that I have a problem with the way they released information for this game. I love this. This was awesome. We talked about it a lot today. But they could have sprinkled this information throughout the last couple of weeks, right? Like, we get just a little bit here and there, and then all of a sudden today, massive info dump. They tweet out all kinds of shit, and link to an article where they interviewed a ton of people working on the game. I just wish they'd be a little more consistent with releasing information, but other than that, it was awesome. We talked about quite a bit today, so just leave your thoughts on whatever you want to in the comments below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to stay up to date with more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @the-David. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Give me a smile, give me forever for a while, give me forever for a while. Quit acting like